So I'm happy to introduce Ned Patton, who's our speaker today. He's a project scientist with in M-cubed, studying atmospheric and oceanic boundary layers and turbulence with a range of foci. Most of Ned's work involves the use of large eddy simulation as a bridge to connect observations and parameterizations for larger scale models through process level understanding. Ned received his undergraduate and his PhD from the UC Davis. So where'd you get your master's in between there? No matter, okay, straight to PhD. He was then a postdoctoral and supercomputing fellow at the University of Minnesota. He's also led or participated in a number of field studies. Most recently, Ned is leading efforts to advance understanding of and theory representing canopy influences on turbulent exchange and transport, which I think will be the subject of this. Take it away.
Okay, folks, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? I don't have a microphone on, so just let me know if there's a problem. I decided when Rich asked me to give a talk, I said, all right, how about I talk about something I have never talked about here before? So it'll be something somewhat new for everybody. Certainly not that new for me. This is a project we've been working on for about the last 4 or 5 years. And so here we go. All right, so trees are extremely efficient at extracting momentum from the atmosphere. They're also very efficient at moving water from deep in the soils to become available for rain through transpiration, and they also shade the underlying surface in certain ways, so they intercept radiation. So they're a key player in sort of regulating the energy balance at the land surface. And in CESM, the land surface model is basically CLM. And recently, in the last, 8 to 10 years, they've been working on evolving the land surface model so that over 100-year cycles that they're running, that trees evolve in their age, how they go through their evolution of efficiency when they're really young, growing really quickly, and then moving more slowly, perhaps later, moving water at different rates through those times, but they also age and die and fall over, and they provide, they're basically carbon stores that then are decomposing, etc. So it's become a big part of the underlying surface in CSM to deal with the evolution of trees through these long-term simulations that they're working on. A key part of that is how and where forests will move as climates move. So it's about where are the seeds going to end up, where's the available light, where are the available nutrients, etc. So wind dispersed seeds is kind of a big piece of that in terms of you need to know where the forest will evolve. And so they have been building into this model called FATES that is trying to deal with this sort of life cycle of the vegetation, the ecology underneath the atmosphere. They recognize the need for wind dispersal parameterizations of how seeds move. It's not something that's in there yet, as far as I know, but it's certainly something I was working with Jackie Schumann about while she was here. I think it's still in the plans, but this is much of this work I think is now moved off to DOE, but we are still sort of trying to advance the knowledge of what these small submodels might look like inside of these larger models. So FATES is a dynamic vegetation model, predicts the growth, death, and the regeneration of plants and subsequent tree distributions. It basically allows for different plants of different traits to compete and work through the available nutrients and sunlight and soil conditions to survive and evolve over their life cycle. The part that's actually, another piece that's funding my work is the security world. So basically, conifer trees are both a blessing and a curse. They grow extremely fast. In New Zealand, they have a forestry industry that's about $4 billion a year. These trees grow, the same trees that we grow and use here for building and making paper, etc. We harvest those trees on about a 60 to 80 year cycle. In New Zealand, the same trees, they're harvesting in like a 20 to 25-year cycle. So the soils, the available water, the sunlight is really efficient. These trees grow literally like weeds. But there's a lot of impact of that. So they don't want to let the forest industry go, but they're having trouble with the forest taking over the native bush. That's the tourism industry that they don't want to lose either. So they're sort of investing some money at this time to try to get at mitigation strategies, simple tools to sort of use for telling farmers that they can or cannot put a plantation in a particular place. And if they were to put a plantation in, how far downwind they would need to look for regrowth. So some of these trees, like lodgepole pine from here, which is Pinus cortata, it has about a 6-year cycle from seedling to being able to recone and reseed happens in about 6 years. So they are extremely efficient at moving forward. You can see down in the bottom right how quickly these forests have grown over the last 20 years. So they're really investing some money at this time trying to figure out how to deal with this, rather than, they don't want to lose the forestry industry, but they want to sort of find ways to manage their system inside of that. All right, so conifer wildings, conifers moving on the landscape are a multi-scale problem. There's, how tall are the trees, how densely packed are the trees, where are the cones, where do they live, at what age, and what are the meteorological conditions required for the cones to open up and let the seeds go. There are landscape questions in terms of how are the stands out there? Are they in patches? Are they in windbreak like rows? How that changes the fluid mechanics. And at the plantation scale, there's talk about managing how they plant their forests. So if we could plant certain trees with heavier seeds in the front of these plantations, would we prevent them from going further distances? Because that's where they would find the strongest winds to launch them further distances. So there's lots of scale questions in this. Right now, we're going to focus a little bit on the topographic scale, so looking at hills and how they change the way the fluid mechanics operates and how that changes the way the seeds move. So a little bit about conifer seeds. This is a Douglas fir example, just because I have those in my back pocket. You can see how large they are, smaller than the size of a quarter. And if you they are winged seeds, so they are what is actually called a samara. So they actually, I will show you in a second how they evolve. But these types of conifers, the cones are typically found in the crown of the tree space, and they definitely require an optimal sort of, they like to call it a Swiss cheese. They need a perfect event of the right drying, the right moisture state of the cone, temperature state of the cone, wind enough to move the branches sufficiently to get the seeds out of the cone. But there's a whole sort of combination of events that have to come into play together at the same time for long distance dispersal to really happen. So let me just show you a little bit about how hard you have to shake these. Sorry, it should go. It is going, it appears, but not playing. That's great. Hold on, spinny ball. This worked about a half hour ago. Oh, no. Come on. Sorry. All right, we will go to the next slide. Yep, this is the 6-year-old laptop, not happy with something. All right, back to this guy, and back to this guy. All right, now it's playing. All right, so basically this is someone shaking the branch of the tree, and you can see that these winged seeds fall at certain rates, and that's a really important parameter for us when we model them, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about here. So this is, how do you measure the terminal velocity of one of these seeds? So this is basically a vertically pointing fan, and these are, if you look, you'll see a tube come into the frame every now and again. So this is actually where we're testing a gust of wind and how it knocks these seeds out of their autorotational mode, and how far they fall, if it's a gust of air from below, from above, from the side. So this is really work of our colleagues in Canterbury, but we're using this information to sort of help us. So basically, the terminal velocity is when the action of gravity on the mass of the seed balances the drag of the seed, so it actually is in a fixed, that is falling at a fixed speed. So this is basically using a fan from below to try to keep them at a fixed height, so we know exactly what the terminal velocities of these seeds are. So why is this important? This is a simple model that people have been using for years now. The walled model, it's basically an inverse Gaussian model that relies on, so these parameters here, so this is the velocity at the release point, the height of the release point, the terminal velocity. This parameter here sets basically where the peak in where these seeds will, where this model will propose that the seed, the most likely location of the seeds will fall. And then this scale parameter sets sort of the breadth of the tails and how far downstream, and this is where the release height comes into play, and this is a measure of the turbulence at the release location. What's really nice about this kind of model, it only requires 2 observables, so that's the wind speed at the release point and a measure of the vertical velocity fluctuations at the release point. I was going to mention to Gordon that this is actually one of the reasons why we need to get vertical velocity variances in our CLM efforts, because if we want to be able to couple with fates, this is something that we're going to want. But the point is, this is a tool, a simple model that incorporates gravitational forces and drag, but it has finite variance, positive skewness, and larger than Gaussian kurtosis, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. So this has been used a lot for flow over sinusoidally repeating 2D hills. So this is a water flume experiment by Gabby. So they're looking at flow over these sinusoidally repeating hills that they then placed plants on top, which is basically just rods to slow the water down and through a fixed depth. And then they took, in this configuration, they took vertically pointing tubes, one tube at the crest of the hill and one tube at the trough of the hill, and they filled them with basically BBs, and they, as the water flows past these tubes, they get launched out of the tube through a Bernoulli-like process, and they bin downstream where those BBs end up landing in a grid that they catch all these at. And so that's what the measurements are here in blue and green. These are releases from the crest. They tend to go the furthest, meaning that they have a higher likelihood of going further downstream. This is distance downstream relative to the height of the trees. So this is basically, they defined that beyond 10 times the height of the trees, that was something that they would call long distance dispersal. So I forgot to mention it, but in that picture of the windbreak, you saw that there's fringe spread. There's really nearby locations where the seeds likely fall. That's what you see here. This is the most likely place for the seeds to land, but that there's a chance, there's large chances that things make it all the way downstream. And this is the walled representation. If they use the measured velocity fields, et cetera, and a known measure of these, they basically dropped these seeds into water and measured how fast they fell. So they actually have an estimate of VT. So with those parameters, that's what the walled model will give them. And that's a beautiful, it's a really surprising and really nice result. And so back in 2009, Gabby and I tried to reproduce these water flume experiments, really studying the fluid mechanics of how the canopy alters flow separation on the lee side of the hill, how that changes the pressure distribution on the hill, and what that does to the turbulence. So in the absence of a plant canopy, there on the lee side of the hill, you're going to have advective motions moving momentum into this region. You're going to have a negative pressure gradient countering that flow, and downward transport of momentum by turbulence. And it's when the combination of these two overwhelm this one that the flow stays attached. If either of these back off and this guy gets larger, then the flow will separate, and that'll change the pressure field on the hill and the overall drag that the outer flow feels tremendously. With trees change the momentum flux profile here in red, and so there's a combination of now 4 terms. So it's the pressure drag of the trees, the pressure gradient driving the backward flow, and those have to balance these for it to stay attached. But because the canopy absorbs momentum through its depth, typically flow over forested hills will separate notably more early than you would expect for hills with no trees on them. Okay, and you can actually see this here, where we were testing a sparse versus a dense canopy, exactly the same forcing, exactly the same configuration. This flow doesn't separate, and this one does, just like theory says it should. Anyway, so we took that model. This is what I'm doing here, and I adapted Jeff Wiles and David Richter's particle dispersion model for inertia. We coupled it into the LES code. So we advance particles individually. We get their position, knowing something about their velocity. We get their velocity, knowing something about their acceleration. This is basically a drag frequency, and this is what's called the slip velocity. So it's the difference between the atmospheric velocity and the particle velocity that is determining the acceleration of that particle along with gravity. This is the atmospheric velocity. That's coming straight out of the LES code, combined with a subgrid scale, an estimate of the subgrid scale from this stochastic model coming out of Thompson's work and Jeff Wiles' work over the years. But we've modified all of that for inertia, so the fact that these seeds have finite mass. And if these seeds are of sufficient size, we can assume that they are in a large Stokes number regime. And in that sense, then the drag coefficient of the seeds is a constant, and that allows us to write the drag frequency in this form. It's all really tied back to the terminal velocity. So that accounts for all of the seed's inertia in that sense. All right? And so, point to note here, we're accounting for gravity, the influence of gravity and the drag on the seed, but we're neglecting things like Bernoulli sailing, or uplift on the wings, or that rotational component that you saw we're looking at. But because the terminal velocity has some aspect of that rotation accounted for, it does account for some of those, but not if it were to get knocked out of its auto rotation and fall more straight down. So there are things that are not included in what we're doing here. So we redid the tool and Poggi work. Their results, their measurements are those with the gray dots, the gray filled circles, and the gray filled circles is their measurements. And so we ran the exact same case. I released seeds in the same way that they were doing in their flume, and you can see that we can reproduce their results quite reasonably well. There are differences down here in the tail. In the solid filled symbols, that's the hilly results. And so what I've done is I'm releasing seeds across the entire ridge of the hill and across the entire foot of the hill at 8 different places on 2 different sets of hills. And these dashed lines are the variation about each of those release points. They released everything at 1 point, released 5,000 of these seeds at once, in 5,000 of those seeds in total, but they only had one location that they were releasing it. So we're actually averaging over the entire set of the turbulence that you would feel across the entire sinusoidally varying hill. So we are releasing more than 1 million particles at each one of these. So, we like to think that our results are much more converged than theirs are, but that theirs fall within the bounds of that which we would expect for the variability across those hills. So just to show a little value of the LES code, that was running with bins of exactly the same width that they were using, which is 1.5 times the height of the trees. That was their bin width. So I just decided, what happens if I shrink the bins and make them very small so I can actually look and find exactly where those pinpoints are. You can see here that the crest, the most likely region where the seeds fall shifts downstream compared to over here by about a canopy height. This is a hill length, and this is a canopy height. So canopy height is one of these tick marks. And but the point is that these shift down when about 1 canopy height. So we're already learning a little bit about these types of seeds that they were unable to do in the water flume study. So what I wanted to do here is I wanted to now take this to looking at, because all of that work has been done and all of the application of the walled model for all this time has always been on 2D sinusoidally repeating hills. They are very hard to find outside. So what we are trying to get at is sort of the essence of how the turbulence responds to and changes if you're looking at isolated 2D versus 3D hills of identical shape. So these are of cosine shape. We are matching a wind tunnel experiment that was done down at the Pi Lab in CSIRO with a cosine shaped hill that is 12 meters tall in my model, not in the wind tunnel. So this is a scaled up version of the wind tunnel. And the trees on top, so this is the height of the trees, is about 3.84 meters. And the thing I wanted to make sure you know is the L that is going to be used for scaling all of these is the half width at the half height. For some reason in this culture, that's the length scale they like. So from base to base of the hill is 4L. Okay, and I have adjusted everything so the center of the hill is at x over L equals 0 for our knowledge down the road. Okay. So I'm running 4 cases. There will be 2 slopes, so I basically keep the hill the same height, but I shrink and change the hill width so we can change the slope of the hill. There's each of those changes are happening for a 2D versus a 3D hill. Okay, now in order to make this isolated hills, we had to do some tricks with the code. So this is the whole domain from front to back. Pressure gradient driving the flow from left to right. No Coriolis turning and neutral buoyancy, just like the wind tunnel. But what I do is between the blue bars, this is periodic. So I basically have created a system with a spectrally friendly fringe method that I keep this thing, so this is periodic here, and I use the back end of this to taper the back end of this. So what comes out at this blue line is exactly the same that comes out as this blue line to the numerical resolution. So we actually have 2 periodic domains running at the same time, but that the flow that these hills feels knows nothing about the upwind hills. So there's no repeating hill structure to modify the flow before it hits the next hill, okay? So just some examples of what the flow fields look like. This is time evolution of the streamline's velocity at just a slice over top of the 2D hill, and then the bottom is the 3D hill at hill center, so it's exactly at the crest of the hill. They look quite similar. You might see that maybe there's more reds in the upper than in the lower, but both of these flows show negative velocities here in the lee side of this is the top of the trees in the dashed lines, but you can see there's actually recirculation on the lee side of these hills. But if you look at them from on top, so these are terrain following surfaces at about the top of the trees. So this is now here, the dashed line, this is the base of the hill and the downwind base of the hill, and this is hill crest, and this is the base of the 3D hill and hill crest with the plus on it. So you can see, even though they look quite similar in the vertical, you can see that in the horizontal, these are quite different flows. And the question we're asking is, how does the change in the turbulence between these 2 cases, between these 4 cases like this, because this is just for the steeper hill case, how does that modify the way seeds move in the landscape? So pressure drag being a big piece of the puzzle. Here you see this is the surface pressure, upwind, and, sorry, where's my mouse? Upwind, this is the base of the hill here, and the crest of the hill here. So you can see that, and these are the measurements from the wind tunnel, matching these solid lines. So you can see that we're actually doing quite well, matching the measurements of the pressure field at the surface. And then these are the pressure trace along the surface for the 2D hill cases. Important to note that those are about twice the magnitude of those over the 3D hill cases. And if we now look at the pressure drag, so the pressure drag being the correlation between the pressure and the hill slope, you can see that the pressure drag over these hills changes dramatically. So dashed lines being the 2D hill cases, solid lines being 3D. Everything above the line, that's drag. So this is positive drag. So it's basically reducing it's imparting, it's slowing the fluid down. Whereas in the region on the upwind side of the hill crest, so the hill crest being at this solid line, that there's a region of acceleration. The pressure is actually accelerating the flow over the top of those hills. That's what is really what people are looking for when they're placing wind turbines on the tops of hills, etc. But it's more about the space over which that happens changes with hill slope. So you can see that the lower sloped hills, that's the 0.16, this is the maximum slope on the hill, and the 0.26, those are the two hill steepnesses. We expect this one to separate, this one we expect not to separate. But the point is that the distance over which the acceleration occurs is unique between all of these cases, and that the total drag is notably larger in the 2D hill, steep hill case compared to the others. Some mean wind profiles. You can see the acceleration up over the hill. So these are time averaged profiles for the 3D hill cases on the center line, and for the 2D hill cases, they're laterally averaged. But you can see that the 2D hill cases definitely accelerate the flow more so over the loft, but you can see here's the flow separation in the lee of the hill in the steeper hill case compared to that in the more shallow sloped case. What's important though is that even before you've hit the base of the hill, the vertical velocity field already knows about the hill, and that's the pressure field driving vertical motions. And again, you get more vertical mean vertical velocity in the steeper hill cases, as you might expect, but that one of the things I wanted to make sure to note here is that these are quantities in a coordinate system relative to the flat terrain here. Very different than if you're using a planar fit method and putting your sensor on the side of the hill somewhere and trying to rotate things into a mean wind direction. So you have to be very careful interpreting or relating your results, that which you might measure, and the processing you do with your data is going to rotate this piece of the field out of that. So you need to be careful with that if you're looking at flow over hills of this sort. Okay. So I just wanted to show a little bit about the spatial variation of the wind field. So the shallower hill case on the upper row, lower row is the steeper hill case. For the 3D hill cases, you can see notably stronger winds on the front wind side. So in the absence of trees, this peak would be right over the hill crest. So because the canopy interfaces with the flow through pressure, and the flow separates in the way that it does, it actually shifts the pressure field in ways that makes the highest wind speeds be on the front side of the hill, not on the actual hill crest itself. Okay, you can see that as the flow hits that 3D hill, that it's already diverging around that hill and coming around back on the lee side. That takes even 6 to 8 hill lengths for that to actually recover downwind of the hill. and the vertical velocity field. One of the interesting things that I've noticed is that there, because of the flow separation, the downwelling motions on the lee side of the hill, on the steeper hill case, are actually weaker than those over where it doesn't separate, where it actually stays attached on the lee side of the hill. And this is, again, these are surfaces at the top of the trees. So I wanted to understand what the flow that the cones might feel for the separation of these seeds. So quantitatively, the turbulence looks quite similar across all four of these. You can see that there's a push upward of vertical velocity, streamlined velocity variance that's larger on the downwind side of these hills, but that the vertical velocity variance, you actually don't see tremendous difference except for the longer recovery downwind of the 2D steep hill, okay? But if you look at horizontal planes, and this is just the 3D steep hill, that this is looking at the streamlined velocity standard deviation, lateral velocities, vertical velocities, and then the momentum fluxes that go with those. So enhanced sigma u on the front side, weak diminishing of sigma u on the lee side, sigma v, sigma w. So you can see there's a reduction of sigma w on the front side of the hills compared to that on the lee side. And there's strong downward momentum stress on those sort of outer flanks as the flow is able to leak around the sides of those hills, but that there's a large portion of horizontal turbulent transport responsible for that recovery on the lee side of these of this hill. All right, so now to the seed dispersal piece. So on these hills, I'm letting seeds go at x over L minus 2, minus 1 at 0, so that's at hill crest, just on the lee side of the hill, and then at the hill base on the back end. So that you can see here. And then for the 3D hill, I'm releasing them along a center line here, but then also along the flanks, but I'm only going to really talk about the stuff that's right along the center line at the moment. So these seeds have inertia, just like we discussed with the VTs that I'm specifying here of 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. I'm really only going to talk about the 0.5. These are all chosen to match sort of the typical seeds that we find in New Zealand, where Pinus contorta is the lodgepole pine. That's the one that they're no longer allowing them to plant there. They have a terminal velocity of about 0.6, plus or minus a bit, so around 0.5. And then the one that you saw actually rotating in the wind tunnel there, that is a Pinus radiata, and that has a terminal velocity of about a meter a second. So that's why these were picked, and I just wanted a range that was nice across those. But the other point here is there's no abscission threshold. So I'm letting the seeds go. They're immediately let go in the flow at the speed of the current flow. So I'm not waiting for them. I'm not waiting for a branch shaking. I'm not waiting for a gust. I'm just letting them go as they might. And like I said, I'm going to focus just on the centerline releases. So this is there's a lot in this plot. This is for the VT of 0.5. These are for releases at -2, so the upwind side of the hill, and then the upwind side of the hill halfway up. These are for releases at the hill crest, and then on the two on the backside. The upper two here, so the green and the blue, are the 2D hill cases, and the red and the orange are the 3D hill cases for the two different steepnesses. Clearly, on the upwind side of the hill, It's the releases on the 2D hills that travel the furthest, so the ones that have the highest likelihood of long-distance dispersal. But that as you reach the top of the hill, these sort of converge, not completely, but there's less distinction between the greens and the blues and the reds and the oranges. But that on the lee side of the hill, it's actually the 2D shallow hill case that actually the seeds travel the furthest, and that's tied to the fact that it doesn't separate and the wind speeds don't slow down so much, and they actually are high wind speeds taking these seeds longer distances at the when they leave the top of the trees. But there's also a lot of shear that will help them launch. So the point is, we are seeing, this is the end of my bin, so I didn't let it go beyond 80H, 80 canopy heights downstream, but there's clearly, I should have let those go longer because there's the potential for these seeds to go even further downstream than that which I show. Why is this? So these are crosswind integrated, so basically every non-dimensional time in the code, I'm actually laterally averaging where the particles are. These are just the steeper hill cases, so the top row is the 2D steep hill case, the bottom row is the 3D steep hill case. And I wanted to understand or at least be able to show why these, so in the previous plots, you saw this distinction where the 2D hill cases traveled much further than those on the 3D hill cases. And you can see that for this particular case, seeds released here at -2, they actually have this extra bump, a higher likelihood, and that's exactly one whole hill length downstream. Seeds that make it out of the canopy on the front side of the hill actually get lofted up the front side of the hill and end up going over top of the separation bubble, and that's what ends up making the 2D hill seeds in the 2D hill case go further. The seeds in the 3D hill case can make them their way around the side of the hill, and so that's why you don't see that on. Where my mouse ended up is over here, so where you don't see those extra bumps. So these two release points here end up looking quite much like those going over the top of it. It's the seeds released at the top of the hill that end up going first. Okay, so the question is, how does the world model work for this? So now the LES results are in the circles. The colors are their release points. The top row is the 2D hills. The bottom row is the 3D hills. Again, for the terminal velocity case of 0.05, maybe here for a second, but the take-home message is that using the LES-derived velocity fields, vertical velocity standard deviations at the seed release point, the walled model tends to overestimate the long-distance dispersal, and that is largely tied to the fact that we don't have these repeating hills and the fact that it's the 3D versus the 2D hills. So you can see the 2D hills actually look better. The wall does a better job of reproducing those than it does the 3D hills. So there's still a lot of work to do with this, but the point is, wind-driven seed dispersal is important for future climate and for biosecurity. We tested a new Lagrangian dispersion model inside of our code, accounting for gravity and drag, tested it against the flume measurements. It reproduces things quite nicely. Long distance dispersal is more likely than the walled model would predict if you account for the range of turbulent eddies possible if you sample across the entire hill rather than just at one point. And that for isolated hills, the dispersals over shorter distances in general compared to that over 2D hills that are are sinusoidally repeating, and that it's even shorter distances if it's a 3D hill. And that the walled model works pretty well for sinusoidally repeating hills, but that it overpredicts things for isolated and 3D hills. Caveats, of course, we're neglecting critical things, that seed abscission problem. I'm trying to get them to tell me what it takes to get a seed out of a cone. They haven't told me that yet. Greeley sailing is basically a pressure gradient based on the gust, pushing the seed forward, and then uplift on the seeds, etc. These are things that we're not accounting for at this time, but we have the potential to do so now that we have this tool. All right, that's it. Thanks, folks.
Does a 2D hill become a 3D hill?
I have other runs that are in the mix that I didn't talk about. So I have runs where I'm actually extending the hill laterally, trying to address that very question. So I don't have that answer yet, but it's a working process.
Yeah. No, a long time ago I did these wind tunnel measurements where essentially it was a building and the question came up, and it took a very long distance before a 2D hill, before a 3D hill turned into a 2D.
Yeah. Jim?
So first off, where's that picture from?
Somewhere northeast.
Okay, I was going to say it looks like Pennsylvania. All right. The more important question, if you release the seeds from the top of the hill, and yet you pointed out that because of the canopy, the peak velocity is actually a little bit in front of the peak.
Right.
So why didn't you release from the peak velocity point, and if you had, would it have gone farther?
Possibly, yep, likely. But didn't know that when I started all this. So this is, we can still go back and re-release seeds at other locations. It's more, I had to pick something, and I picked, sort of clean locations on the hill compared to other adventures. So, but yeah, you are correct. I should have, I can absolutely release seeds.
So then, okay. But, the stuff that you left out, especially the lift that's on these seeds as they rotate, seems to me that would play a huge role. In fact, it seems to me that could even dominate. So are any of your results useful?
Thanks for that, Jim. The answer is yes, they're useful because we're quantifying what we're doing, and that we have learned something. Whether or not it's applicable to the outside is a whole other question.
I guess I should have said, are any of your results applicable to the outside?
Baby steps, Jim. Baby steps.
Baby steps, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of along those lines, I saw a talk at AMS where they were looking at fall speeds of snowflakes and showing that those effects are really important for snowflakes as well, as you might suspect, with similar terminal velocities here around 0.5 to 1 meter a second.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you've kind of looked in that literature, how you might address that caveat or incorporate those effects in the model in the future.
Well, that's part of what the rest of the team's working on. So they're really working on, parting out the pieces of that wind influence and the rotational component. And then, as you saw, if they perturb the seed, how does it change its fall speeds? So trying to sort of see if we can account for that in the modeling effort. But exactly how to do the wind lift piece, I'm going to leave to my expert engineering colleagues who are working on that. But it's, I think it's a hard thing to study because they're moving. And how do you sample that?
Okay.
I'm curious as to whether there's been any practical application of these results yet, and if so, what has it led to?
So John Finnegan and Ian Harmon have an analytic Clover Hills model they have coupled with the wall model that the New Zealand group is using to sort of help get past their 4 checkpoint criteria that they usually use to decide whether or not someone can plant a plantation where they want to or not. So they're actually starting to apply the model right now. But it doesn't incorporate, they don't deal with the fact that the Wald model overpredicts on certain types of hills yet. But they are actually taking this and implementing it inside, driven by a wharf in certain ways. So looking at small-scale hills, but with large-scale winds driving it. And so, yeah, it's a work in progress. But whether or not these results have made it into that yet, the answer is no.
So is a stable density stratification ever an issue with these?
Absolutely, that's next on my list. More urgently than releasing at the right location. Meaning, our next phase is I'm looking at buoyancy. That's my next piece of this puzzle. But I wanted to demonstrate that we could do this with the wind tunnel results to start with, and make sure that we were actually, had the tools to do what we need to do, and now I can take it to places that we can't do in the wind tunnel.
Have you tested for the sensitivity to wind speed, or in other words, what happens when you blow 20 meters per second storm over it?
Well, I haven't tested that, but assuming the trees don't blow over, we think we understand the fluid mechanics sufficiently to say that it should be very similar and scalable.
Okay. One quick question. What is your top boundary condition?
Right now it is du, dv, dz is 0, and w is 0, but it's up at
W is 0.
500 meters.
500 meters.
Yeah. So it's a pretty, I use a stretch grid, so it's well taller than the wind tunnel at this point.
Okay, I don't see any questions on the Slido, so I think let's thank Ned one more time.
All right.